The impudence, the audacity, the unmitigated gall of those Knuckleheads of Liberty podcasters, daring to voice opinions outside the mainstream of accepted thought. Listen if you dare. It's angry, it's funny, it's even sometimes sad, but it's always based on freedom and justice, as you will see. Here's our host, Jason McPhee.
Welcome to the Knuckleheads of Liberty. We're coming at you on September 19th, 2022. It always seems like we're just one day closer to the abyss with this Biden administration, but fortunately we have something new to bring you today. We have Chase and Remington of the TAC show, and they're going to tell us about their show today. But before we get into that, let me introduce you to our panel. In our upper left-hand corner, we have our screaming eagle of freedom, Tim Everett. He is a pilot in the state of California. In our lower left-hand corner, we have Leon, the word Brathwaite, last word in Liberty. He is a retired engineer in the state of California. And my name is Jason McPhee, and I'll be your host. And in our upper right-hand corner, as I mentioned before, we have Chase and Remington of the TAC show. And so let's just jump right into it. So tell us about the TAC show. What is the TAC show about?
So the TAC show is a podcast that we do, we started it because we were kind of getting fed up with how everybody's just butting heads all the time when it comes to politics. And we decided, let's start a podcast where we can talk about how to improve people's conversations so that they can talk about politics. Now, you hear the old adage, don't talk about religion or politics at the dinner table. And we say you should just do it skillfully and in a way that strengthens your relationships instead of destroying them. So that's why we do it. We have guests on. We talk about liberty, we talk about communication, and we bring those two things together, and that's kind of our shtick, as it were.
Well, no, that certainly seems great. We've had some other guests along those lines. We've had like the Braver Angels, and I believe there was another group. I'm trying to think of them off the top of my head, but I mean that's sorely needed in these times. It just seems like everybody is at each other's throats, and it's because of these echo chambers. So it's great that you guys seem to be kind of busting the echo chambers with your show. Then
trying to
doing our best. Part of busting the echo chamber involves allowing people to voluntarily come on the show who disagree with each other, and that can get tough sometimes. It seems like people have come to a position where they almost don't want to be seen next to someone who disagrees with them because they'll get canceled if they do.
So do you guys actually have people on the show who you would say are not in line with the thinking of the liberty-minded? I mean, people who are more authoritarian in their thinking?
We try to, yeah.
So I don't think that they think that they're more authoritarian in their thinking. I don't think very many people think that they're the authoritarian. But one of the people that we had on that was actually a really delightful conversation was the president of Brady, the anti-gun lobby in DC, Chris Brown. And that was a really interesting conversation. We were able to talk about a lot of the things we agree on, as well as some of the things we disagree on. And I feel like I could call her today and just see how she's doing. You know, it wasn't any kind of nasty, like, "Nah, you're stupid. Nah, you're stupid." You know, like we see on the Facebooks.
Yeah, it went well enough that they invited us on their show, and we continued the conversation with their podcast host that they have over there. So it was, that was good. We were able to at least model some amount of good conversation with people who I think we would classify as more on the authoritarian side of things.
Right. Right. That's good.
Well, you know, when I first met you guys, or at least I first bumped into Chase, and that was at Freedom Fest. And so that was, it happened back in July of this summer. And that was in Las Vegas. And, Freedom Fest was definitely mostly libertarians, I guess, or a libertarian oriented conference, I guess. So are you guys, is your show sort of more focused on the liberty perspective? Is that sort of how you guys come at your guests, or do you guys just like generally want to reach out to everybody?
That's a great question, and it's kind of morphed over the course of our podcast. We've been doing this for a year and 3/4, something like that. We started in January of 2021, and it first started, it was kind of people who we could reach out to and who would come on the show. After that, we ended up being invited to by Yeonmi Park, who's an escaped girl from North Korea. We ended up being invited by her to the Oslo Freedom Forum down in Miami last year. So we went to that and ended up talking to all sorts of dissidents and activists against tyrant nations. And then from there, actually at a party at our second Oslo Freedom Forum, we were invited to go down to Freedom Fest. And so we've slowly moved over towards Liberty because those are the people who we've been able to run into in our travels, so to speak.
Yeah, it's been actually those two things, like really teaching about and talking about liberty and the importance of liberty, coupled with like the bringing people together and kind of having a unifying message and seeking understanding. Those have been kind of two tension points that we kind of pull on to figure out where it goes. And it sometimes goes one way more than the other, where it's like, all right, let's focus on communication and understanding. And sometimes it's like, look, if we don't hammer out this point on freedom, we're not going to have freedom anymore. And so we go between those because that's really the balance that you need in order to have freedom. You need to be able to communicate the ideas effectively, and you need to be able to have people on your side. Otherwise, you can be the most freedom-loving person in the world, but if you are surrounded by tyrants, you're really not free at all.
Indeed.
Yeah.
So when you guys started off, you did not start off with the intent of having a liberty-oriented show, or you just started off something general. What when you started?
So initially, when we started, it was actually kind of Second Amendment focused.
Okay.
We started talking about gun rights, and
Right.
We had a lot of guests on who were kind of in that sphere. Teachers from the 2A community, like who focused on women, or
Competitive shooters. There's the veteran organization, Heroes Haven, their founder.
these guys. So we started out a lot in the Second Amendment space, but shifted more towards general liberty fairly quickly. We found that was more of what we were passionate about.
Well, so we love guns, and we think the Second Amendment is really important. But the thing is, you can't talk about the Second Amendment without talking about freedom altogether and what to do about it. Because the Second Amendment is like a fallback. Like our first line of defense should be our words.
Yes.
You know. But I think one of the things that I'm kind of bothered with a lot of shows is they're like, oh, we got to fight. We got to, like, come and take my guns. Like, fight me. Like, we'll, let's just see how this ends up, And I'm just like, dude, we got to stop talking like that. I mean, if it gets to that, it gets to that. Sure. But we got to stop talking like that right now. We're not there yet. We're at the point where it's time to change minds. It's time to change our own minds sometimes. And it's time to change other people's minds. And I feel like with this podcast, I've learned so much. I might express an opinion, like we did a Little Mermaid reaction video to the new Little Mermaid trailer, and we got all kinds of feedback on that. We've never been called racist so many times in our lives.
It was about hourly for about a week there. I was called a racist.
Yeah. But the thing is, it wasn't just like, oh, look at these people, like dumb people saying dumb things. It was, look at these different people saying different things, and we're able to reevaluate what we think. Maybe kind of learn how to articulate our own words better. And then, I don't know, it's just we're learning a lot. I feel like this is more our learning than anyone else's,
Sure.
Which is cool.
Yeah, that is something nowadays that it just seems like there's no charity in meaning. Everybody just assumes that, it's almost like they're looking for to pull the worst possible meaning out of whatever you're saying so that they can conveniently attack you at that point and look heroic doing it. I don't know.
Well, I mean, it is very common these days that if you disagree with someone, you're racist, you're sexist, you're homophobic, you're transphobic, and every other bad name they can find to cast upon you. That is what it is these days. So it's I'm not surprised to hear that you've been called a racist. There are a few other names that they call me too. So
being on public radio, you probably hear things like that all the time. There's I guess what it comes down to is I think it's a lack of trust for the most part between the two sides as they see it in this culture war, where if you espouse an opinion that is of one side, the other side is going to completely mistrust everything you've ever said and everything you're ever going to say because you disagreed with them once. We can't trust you ever again. And I think that lack of trust is really what's causing a lot of this friction, where in order to have a good dialogue with someone, a good conversation that can actually move forward, you have to have some level of trust that the person you're talking to will accept your opinion and not try to make the worst of it. And people don't trust each other at all. Because there's no trust, they assume the worst, and it just spirals out of control.
Could it be a synopsis?
Go ahead.
I'm sorry.
Go ahead.
Could it be a synopsis to say that one of your main focused goals is to defuse the current situation of this kind of distrust that's going on?
Yeah, I think you could say that. So we're putting out Freedom School, I believe this week, that I recorded, that talks about the Second Amendment and how you might disagree with someone. And I don't propose we need the Second Amendment. It's the freest. Here's how you should think about it. The way I proposed it is, look, I want you people to look at how someone who's in a different place than you could think differently and why they might not be nuts for thinking that we should have more guns or why we should have fewer guns. And I do my best. I have my biases that definitely come through, but I think we try to do our best to at least understand and try to put forth the other side's opinion, whether we agree with it or not. At times, we play devil's advocate and try to put forth the strongest defense for an opinion that we disagree with that we can, but we really try to make sure that people can be understood. I think first and foremost.
It's interesting, you guys have talked a little bit about the Second Amendment, and one of the things we try and ask our guests as they come on, because it's not intuitive in this world of government monopolized public schools, how people come to liberty is essentially almost everybody goes through these government schools, and the real focus in those schools is about how solutions can be done at the ballot box and through the state, and not so much the market. And so it's interesting to hear how people somehow get red pilled. And how did you guys come to liberty? Was it through Second Amendment issues, or was it some other route?
So for me, actually, Chase and I both grew up in a church that's very focused on liberty. We not only talk about, like, growing up, we were not only told the Constitution is great, but that it's almost sacred, or that it is sacred, and that's super, super special, right? And that was kind of how we were brought up. My family was like kind of classic conservative Republican. And then one day my cousin, I just got back from volunteering overseas for a couple of years, and my cousin said, "Hey, I want you to come learn some stuff with me, like that I've been learning, and I think you're going to find it interesting." And he started teaching me about kind of libertarian ideals and kind of pointing out some of the hypocrisy between like the two main parties and what they say they stand for versus the policies they actually enact. And I ended up that year becoming a delegate in the Republican Party supporting Ron Paul that was 2012. And so he didn't end up becoming the primary candidate for the Republican Party, but I tried anyways. But that's where I really started to dig into it a little bit. I was probably 22, started to dig into it a little bit and really see, like, how do we apply principles universally across the board? We talk about, like, everybody talks about how bad violence is. Everybody, right? So Democrat, Republican, Green Party, doesn't matter. You talk about how bad violence is. Nobody's into violence until they want to make a policy, which they support through violence. But libertarianism, or we could say big L libertarianism, is about doing things, creative problem solving without the use of violence. And it was there where I was like, hey, you know what? Like, we can start to drop down to our base principles and start to apply those across the board in a more, not effective, but a more like real way, like that authentic way, where it's not just, hey, this is we think this is bad, but in order to make change, we have to do this other bad thing to make it work. And I just, I felt like a lot more authentic to myself as I've tried to walk that path. And so that's kind of where we started. And so Chase and I actually ran a business that we had another friend who introduced us to, and it felt very inauthentic. It was a political business that was it wasn't us. And we're like, you know what, let's do a podcast where we actually talk about the things we believe in. And we actually try to make the world better, not by trying to spark controversy, though we do like our fair share of controversy, because you can't get away from it. Yes. But to share ideas about how to make the world better through freedom, because freedom isn't just like this cool idea, like, yeah, freedom. It's the foundation upon where creativity can thrive and where we can all thrive.
Yes.
Yes.
Well,
When he says words like authentic, which is the opposite of our oft mentioned H word, which I will not mention because I don't want to, mention it because we mention it so often. But that's authenticism or being authentic is the opposite of being this H word. Does the TAC team know what word I'm referring to that I don't want to say?
I think I said that word just about a minute ago.
It's got 3 syllables if you're in the audience, and it ends in it.
I think Jesus said that word a few times in the New Testament.
Yeah, Tim and I have an agreement not to use the word on the show anymore because we use it so often. We have abused it so often. It's unbelievable.
Yeah. Well, Remington, we heard about your journey to Liberty. What about you, Chase? Is it a little different for you, or were you is sort of Second Amendment and liberty-minded friends?
That's actually a good question. I think until a couple of years ago, I was pretty agnostic towards the Second Amendment. I didn't have any firearms myself, so it wasn't that path. What really got me started is, like Remington said, we were in a religion that we were born into that really accentuates the role of liberty and the freedom of people's choice, freedom of choice, and the ability for people to choose what path they want to go down. But I think what really did it for me was learning about business and markets first, and then kind of moving from there into politics, where it was the government is in my way all the time.
Yes.
And then moving from business over into politics was like, oh, I see. There are people who don't want the government in my way all the time in my business dealings. I see. I like those people. And that was kind of where I went. I think you could classify me less as a libertarian, more like where Mike Lee is, right on the border kind of libertarian conservative. I'm right in that area. But I've been more and more pulled towards the libertarian side the more I've done this podcast.
And for our,
well,
I was just going to say for our listeners, Mike Lee, that's the senator. Is he the senator from Utah? One of the
He is. Yeah, he's actually
yes.
a neighbor of mine. He lives within like 3-4 minutes of me.
Okay.
Yeah,
okay.
It was very, very close to me.
Chase, you just said you're on the border between libertarianism and conservatism. I find myself right there. As a matter of fact, I refer to myself as a conservatarian because I am. There are some conservative principles that I cannot give up and I will not give up, and there are some libertarian principles that I hold there. So I'm kind of like you, but
Yeah, that's where I find myself. I like tradition. I like a good set of morals. I think it's important towards a nation, but at the same time, I do think it's important that everyone has the freedoms to choose or not choose those morals. So it's
there you go.
Right,
totally with you on that one. Totally. Yes. Yeah.
Like I tell my to my liberal friends, I'm conservative, and to my conservative friends, I'm liberal. So, But I just think I'm free to do whatever I want.
Free to choose always and forever. I'm with that.
That's right. Mm-hmm.
Well, it's great. It sounds like you guys are doing a lot to spread ideas of liberties through your shows, especially talking to people outside of sort of the liberty echo chamber, I guess you might call it. But I guess are there kind of any sort of milestones of sort of success you guys have marked? I mean, are you guys growing well? You guys like hit certain guests that are just sort of like plateaus that you guys feel like you've really hit something?
So one of the things that we tell ourselves kind of behind the scenes is we think of ourselves as not just a podcast, but the hub for people to get together from kind of different places, right? And to be able to kind of find that not necessarily compromise, but maybe common ground or understanding, right? And one of the biggest successes that we actually had with the podcast, we would say, is off screen, which was we call it brokered a meeting, if you will, between Brady, right, the gun organization, the anti-gun organization, and Walk the Talk America, who is a guns and mental health education organization. and we had a conversation together, the three parties, and got to talk about those different things and where people agree and all that. I wish it had been, I wish we had the cameras rolling when we did it, but it was just so much more, it was just so meaningful, because it wasn't just about like, oh, cool, we got this show has great ratings. Oh, look, we got all these thumbs ups. It was actually bringing people together that probably wouldn't have the chance to do that, or maybe be willing to do that, or find the opportunity and actually have those conversations. It felt, for lack of a better word, and to maybe at the risk of sounding like I have delusions of grandeur, it felt monumental. Like it felt like a key movement in the liberty movement, but it was all behind the scenes.
So, we like to think that our side, the liberty-based side, is pure as the wind-driven snow, and that we're the ones that want to bring people with differing opinions into our presence, so that we can discuss this like adults and so on. And so you guys have based your podcast around that basic premise of bringing people of all persuasions together and discussing and find common ground and discuss uncommon ground and so on. So, but because we're pure as wind-driven snow, we tend, at least I do, maybe I shouldn't spread that out there to everyone else, but I tend to think that the other side is not doing the same thing. In other words, they just want to stay in their echo chamber and not talk to anyone, not bring anyone in and confront them with their ideas. And of course, because I'm so intelligent and pure as well, both things, smarter than the average bear and also holier than thou, I'm thinking that it's because their ideas cannot stand the light of day. So with that kind of prejudice brought out there, you guys have given an example of the Brady group where they reciprocated and brought you into their world, their echo chamber, and then you had a discussion. And then I think you just gave another example just now of that same thing. Is there other left style, more authoritarian leaning groups that have in the past brought, and may not have been you guys, but it could have been someone else, liberty-based people in to discuss issues? Can you think of any others that are similar to that, to what your experience has been with those in those two cases that you've discussed so far?
I think Dave Rubin is probably like the most like blatant example. He wasn't always, like the champion of liberty. And I think it was the fact that he brought so many different people on that, and Joe Rogan too. It's the same thing, right? Like they weren't, we look at them now and we're like, oh, those guys are libertarians, but that wasn't always that way, right? They brought lots of different people, and they continue to bring lots of different people on. They learn, which is really cool, because when you watch a host of a show and you see like, oh, they just learned something, then you learn like even more. It's the learning is modeled, plus the thing that is being learned just sinks right in. When you're watching a show and people are like, oh, I'm right, and these people are so dumb all the time, like, you don't really learn anything. You just kind of get a little more like falsely arrogant in your opinion, I think.
Yeah, I think Glenn Greenwald will also fall into that category. I mean, he is a known leftist, but boy, he's a guy who has really been open-minded about the issues of liberty. He really have been.
Oh yeah, and what's the name of that guy that's very popular on the left, and he's been coming out and saying, hey, you people on the left are
talking about Bill Maher.
Yeah, I was gonna say
Bill Maher. Yeah, one who's not been so congenial, so to speak, but is bringing people from the other side in to talk to him. Roughly is Vosh. He's a semi-popular Twitch streamer and he's from the left. He'll bring people in to talk to them, but it's not very cordial when he brings them in to talk to them, but he does bring them in.
Well, hey, at least he's bringing them in,
Yeah, it's true. It's true.
That's a step in the right direction, and I applaud you guys for doing the same thing. So that I mean, it's tough out there and some people you just will never be convinced, no matter what you do. But I think it's great at least to give it a shot, and that's awesome what you guys are doing.
Well, we're starting to get.
Go ahead, Jason.
Well, I was just going to say we're starting to get close to the end of the show, and I wanted to ask you guys real quick too. Are there any challenges you guys are facing as well? With your growth and maybe people pushing back on you, with your open-mindedness or liberty.
The hardest pushback is always big tech, right?
By far.
Big tech has a bias, and fingers crossed this ruling that just happened in Texas last week holds, so that big tech won't be able to push one side political viewpoint over the other anymore. But essentially, big tech is the biggest obstacle. Anyone who disagrees from the narrative or says naughty words doesn't deserve to speak, I guess, in their eyes. And so we have very obvious shadow banning from certain big tech, and less obvious, but possibly they're shadow banning from the others.
Yeah, I'm not saying it's Facebook and Instagram. I'm not saying that. I wouldn't say something like that. I wouldn't say YouTube maybe does it too, but I definitely wouldn't say Facebook and Instagram do it for sure.
Yeah. So
I'd never say that.
We've definitely experienced it. We know it's there. I mean, it's kind of the open secret that shadow banning exists. And so that's the biggest obstacle in growth is getting through the big tech veil. I highly recommend to everyone who ever brings anything up is to get into alt tech, look into Rumble, look into Truth Social, look into Minds, look into all these other big or smaller platforms that aren't so biased.
Well, as we're getting close to the end of the show, James, maybe you could bring the visual back up, because I just wanted people to be able to see where to reach them. They have a webpage here that called tacconversations.locals.com, and they also have a YouTube page as well that will help connect you. Did you guys have any sort of parting thoughts for the audience that you wanted to leave everybody with? Because it's just been a great conversation. I think people would really love to connect with your show if they haven't.
Yeah, please. And you can actually get to our first website by just going to thetacshow.com, and it'll redirect right there. Final thoughts for people is the thing that we need to remember is we're all humans, whether we're Democrat, Republican, Libertarian, Green Party, whatever. We're all human beings, and we can understand each other better. And understanding and validating people is not the same as condoning or agreeing. And if we can understand people and be kind, we will be able to solve problems a whole lot better than if we just spend all our time fighting.
Awesome. Well, that's a great message to leave everything on. And for our viewers, we plan to have one more conversation with them, sort of general topics. So you can catch that podcast later as well. Thanks so much for joining us. And until the next time, stay free.
Yes, indeed. Life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness, always and forever.
Thank you for listening to the Knuckleheads of Liberty podcast. Find us on Facebook, Rumble, YouTube, your favorite podcast network, and at knuckleheadsofliberty.com.